Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And we're back on the College Football Survivor Show. We're doing coach rankings. This is not particularly inventive, but if everybody else is going to do it, we can do it. And it does tell you something about our thinking about the best coaches and best programs in college football. And if you listen to this podcast, that probably matters to you. Shehan at CBSSports.com, you guys did a group ranking, which sort of led us to doing this ourselves because you had to do this, ranking all the best coaches in college football. We're doing our top 10 here. People can go read the list at CBSSports.com. Can you tell us a little bit about who voted on that, how you guys did that? The one thing I like about that is, I don't know how many years in a row you guys have done that now, but you at least did it last year. So when you guys have the rankings and you're writing them out, you're saying, okay, this guy moved up, this guy moved down, which I think is always valuable. What was it like doing it at CBSSports.com?
Yeah, I think that, this is a big project that we do every year. This always ends up being a hot topic of conversation, I think. I think that we put out one of the more definitive lists that people release over an off season. And like you said, our entire team votes on it. We did expand our team actually this year. So that will, I think, skew the numbers a little bit, that we had some realignments, I guess, on our team. And so some new voters may be coming into the fray. But it's still, I think, pretty instructive, like you said, to compare this year versus last year. Tom Fornelli does a great job of putting together our list based on our ballots, and then also putting analysis for all of it. So definitely, look, I have my ballot. It's not the same as the final list that came together. I disagreed vehemently on a couple of these. The one that I'll mention, and maybe we'll talk about a few of these more later. I thought that Jonathan Smith over at Oregon State just got wildly disrespected. He ended up at number 32 on the list. I had him at number 12 because he won 10 games at Oregon State. Oregon State, now, obviously, I think that one of the things whenever we talk about these criteria is trying to balance the idea of winning at the highest level, right? Competing for national championships versus where you're at. What is success at the program that you're at? And for me, for example, when you look at Oregon State, winning 10 games is not just good success. It's like unprecedented, wild success. And I probably value that more than some other voters who may be valued, winning at the highest level, no matter what program you're at or no matter what outside context there is. So that's one of the things, though, is that because we have a bunch of voters, it does normalize things a little bit. It means that there's lots of different people with lots of different perspectives coming together. And, I think that what's the phrase? Wisdom of the masses, right? I think that this is in some ways that where you do have an opportunity to kind of get all of those thoughts together. And maybe at the end, you come up with a little bit of a real consensus.
I don't know Tom Fornelli personally, but I was reading some of his write-ups for the different coaches, and I appreciated them because he was yelling at you guys as voters in some of them. And I was like, that's what I would do if I was writing that up. In particular, Matt Campbell from Iowa State was 35th on your list. And he was screaming at people about why is Matt Campbell this low? Matt Campbell dropped 12 spots on the CBS Sports list. Here's what he wrote. Okay, here's how these rankings work. When you win more games than you should at a school, nobody expects to win a lot of games. You rocket up the rankings. But if you dare have one subpar season and fail to live up to the expectations you set, you will be punished severely. Campbell is the latest example. So what if he's responsible for the most successful run in program history? He went 4-8 last year. He stinks now. Just in case it isn't clear, I am not criticizing Campbell with these comments. I'm criticizing my colleagues. I thought that was hilarious because to me, Jonathan Smith is in the Matt Campbell spot right now, right? That Matt Campbell was everybody's favorite guy. There were even people on podcasts once upon a time picking Iowa State to make the playoff. I can't remember. I heard someone do that. And then they did have a disappointing year. And it's like, well, that's it. Right. So Jonathan Smith is hot right now. It is hard to compare, hey, you're winning at a program that kind of wins all the time versus you seem singularly responsible for your program being even respectable. And now you're more than respectable, which is what Iowa State did a couple of years ago, which is what Oregon State did now. But I do think it's funny. I think Tom's right. right? That we like to rank guys like Matt Campbell and Jonathan Smith high when they're hot, but sometimes we don't give them a lot of margin for error.
Sure, and I will mention Matt Campbell is number 16 on my list. It's a disparity of 19 spots, which is second only to Jonathan Smith of all the coaches that I ranked. My thing is, because I think anybody can have a good year, right? Obviously there's even more context, but like Tom Allen, right? Tom Allen put together a great season during the pandemic in 2020. And he deserved credit for that. And he, I think, moved up into like the top 35 for putting together a great season during the pandemic. And then everything collapsed. And the reality is, when you have 4 or 5 years of track record and only one of those things is good, that's not good enough. Having that high isn't good enough. But Matt Campbell, Jonathan Smith, this is not 1 year things. This is multi-year builds. This is multiple years of success. Matt Campbell, we're talking about 4 years of or 5 years of winning at least 7 games at Iowa State, and obviously finishing first in the Big 12 during the 2020 season. And the funny thing to me is, people are obviously going to look at Iowa State's 4-8 and say that was the disappointing season. I kind of had them there because they lost everybody from their 2021 team. The 2021 team is actually the disappointing one, because they brought everybody back from a 2020 team that played in the Big 12 title game and then went 7-6. So again, everybody approaches this thing sort of differently. I think that, without saying too much, some people have a little bit more of a national view of college football than maybe some of the other people who vote on this list. I hope that that's subtle enough, but I definitely think that Matt Campbell and the Jonathan Smiths, you have to look at track record. It's not just a 1 year thing. I think that we can be prisoners of the moment sometimes. And when you've coached at a place for 6 years like Matt Campbell, it's not a 1 year evaluation period.
Yeah. And there are guys, for instance, I think maybe the best example of this, Gene Chizik went undefeated and won a national championship at Auburn in 2010. I don't think anybody should have said, well, that makes Gene Chizik the best coach in college football, because in his career as a head coach, he's 24-38 in the 5 other seasons, other than the 14-0 season, when he just said, here, Cam Newton. And Cam Newton said, I got this, and basically won a national championship by himself. So there are things like that where this shouldn't and can't be just a list of the best teams, but it kind of is. So it's hard. How else are you supposed to judge people other than by success on the field? And you end up saying, what do I think? And I've long been interested in like a real project of trying to establish, maybe for every Power 5 team in the country, what are you supposed to be? Let's find out what, based on history, geography, recruiting demographics, conference affiliation, everything else, what should you be? And then you set that guideline, and then you can evaluate people: good year, great year, bad year, horrible year, average year. Because, going 7-5 at Iowa State isn't the same thing as going 7-5 at Georgia or 7-5 at Kansas, right? So, we have to have that. People know that. We know what you're talking about. Let's get to our list. We're going to start at number 1. I will say this. Does it feel to you like there is a Big 7 or Big 8 of college football head coaches right now, that the people listening right now, if we said name the Big 7, name the Big 8, they would be able to do it? Do you think it's that clearly defined?
Well, let me say this. I'm going to get some tweets from people in the city of Columbus, I think, after this list, because I would consider there to be a Big 6.
And you, even the way you acknowledge that, you're not trolling. You're not trolling. You're just saying you acknowledge that maybe your opinion doesn't match up with the consensus. So
we'll have plenty of time for conversation on that list. But yes.
Do you think generally in college football, and I'm probably a little low on one guy, which is why I'm 7-8, saying an 8, because he's not quite in my top 8. Do you think there's a Big 8 consensus?
I think there's a 7. I am curious who you think who you would consider the 8.
I have a guy who's probably higher than most, so it probably is a Big 7. Okay. Let's go to number 1. Has this guy been the number 1 coach in college football for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think it's either 12 years or 14 years that Nick Saban has been the number one coach in college football. Is he still in your mind right now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know, obviously, there are guys pushing for his spot right now, and this is a now ranking. Obviously, your accolades matter, but it is also what you do in this moment. So I do think that maybe in 2024, depending how things go, we can have a real conversation about who in this moment ends up on the top of the list. But it's still just so overwhelming right now that I think that Nick Saban is still number one on my list.
The way I do this is I try to imagine good program X, and I'm hiring a head coach for like the next 3 years, let's say. I'm not looking for a decade, so I'm not penalizing older guys. I'm not looking for 1 year, so I'm not saying like, hey, give me the ghost of Bear Bryant for 1 year. It's like, well, I need you for a couple years, but like I'm making a hire and maybe enough that you do have to recruit. So I am thinking recruiting. I'm thinking culture. I'm thinking scheme. I'm thinking leadership. And at a place where you have the ability to win and now you want to win at the highest level. So that does affect if I'm judging Jonathan Smith or Matt Campbell or Lance Leipold, and I'm saying like, well, would I hire them if I'm trying to win a national championship above some of these other guys? And maybe that's not fair because they've never been at it. Lance Leipold's not going to win a national championship at Kansas. Jonathan Smith's not going to win a national championship at Oregon State.
Lance Leipold is a 6-time national champion. 6-time.
I know. I'm sorry. I used a poor. Is that fair? I don't know, but I'm not, I'm when I think about it in my head, of course, if you're at a big school and succeeding, that moves you up the list a little bit because you've already have the opportunity that now I at program X, I'm going to give you that opportunity. I was looking at 13 and 15-year-old Bleacher Report coach rankings, which made my eyeballs bleed. Back in the slideshow day, it is just gigantic photos of 100 coaches and then little blurbs with no analysis and no expertise in them. I don't know who these Bleacher Report people are.
I was one of them. I was one of them back in the day. But I was in high school.
You were seriously doing Bleacher Report stuff in high school?
Oh, yeah. I was a Chicago Bulls featured columnist when I was 16.
Did you know anything? Are you kidding me? Did you know anything?
I knew some stuff, but yeah, I mean, obviously, no, see, the thing is, right, because like they let basically anybody publish articles there. I at least had the great privilege of getting paid $0 to be assigned articles.
That is unbelievable. We will do an hour-long podcast on Shehan, the 16-year-old Chicago Bulls columnist from Texas, unpaid, squeezing in Bulls analysis in between his geometry homework.
And my mom hated that.
Wow. Bleacher Report, in a lot of ways, can suck it. So, they just found random people, paid them nothing, and were like, can you do 100-slide thing with, any person who... and it's one of those things. The AI stuff that's happening right now makes me nauseous.
Yep.
But it's like, well, if it's replacing that, if it's replacing unpaid teenagers, then I don't know, maybe that's fine, because couldn't the AI do close to what 16-year-old Shehan Jeyarajah's analysis of the Bulls was? Or are you offended by that idea that AI could do what you could do when you were a sophomore in high school?
Oh, no. I think that I definitely did a better job than that. The thing is, right, not to get into my AI rant, AI is fully reflective. It doesn't create something new. Now, look, I actually had an old Bleacher Report article of mine go viral on Reddit 2 or 3 years ago because it asked, it was like, which players in the league right now, this was in 2011, will never reach their potential, and I had Steph Curry on that list. And my argument, to be fair, was because of injuries. Remember, early in his career, he was always injured. But obviously that was pretty funny. And AI could not have done that. AI could not have come up with a list as funny as that.
As wrong as that?
Exactly.
I'm better than a robot because I predicted on my way to prom that Steph Curry would stink for his whole life. So I'm better than a robot. That is not persuasive, Shehan. That is not.
I mean, where's the lie, though? Robots aren't getting old takes exposed. We're going to just lose that whole industry? Come on now.
I do not think Patrick Mahomes will reach his potential. Okay.
I was in on Patrick Mahomes. Let's just be clear.
Oh, man. So this whole Bleacher Report thing, I found one from September 2010, going into the 2010 season. So Saban has his first national title under his belt at that point in 2009. And this Bleacher Report, maybe you know him, maybe you saw him at prom, this Bleacher Report writer, had Saban first on that list. And then I saw another list going into the 2011 season, and this might have been a guy who was at a rival high school going to his prom, and he had Saban 7th after they didn't win the national title in 2010. And that list in 2011 was Bob Stoops, Jim Tressel, Mac Brown, Gene Chizik, Frank Beamer, Chip Kelly, Nick Saban. Because Gene Chizik had just won a national title by saying, "Here, Cam Newton, please save me." And that guy was like, well, that guy, Gene Chizik, I'll tell you, Nick Saban could never do that. So it's like, okay. So anyway, my point is, Saban had a national title at LSU, a split national title. He comes to Alabama. He wins one in 2009. I think starting in 10, he's in the conversation because before it's probably Urban Meyer, and in the list in 10, it's Saban 1, Meyer 2, Jim Tressel 3. And then once he wins the second title, and so that's in the 11 season, now you're going into 12, any list of the best coaching started in college football, starting in the 2012 season, Nick Saban's number one. And I still think we're at the no doubt about it part of that with Nick Saban. Whereas I do think it is fascinating, the comparison between Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, what they've done in their parallel careers, both with the Cleveland Browns. Now here they are. I don't think you'd have Bill Belichick number one right now anymore. I think Belichick has, and I don't know if he's still obviously I don't want to have a Belichick Brady conversation on this podcast, but Belichick feels like he's on the other side and on the way down, where if you were, he's still top 10, maybe top 5. I don't know that anybody's saying there's no doubt about it. Bill Belichick is the best coach in the NFL. I still think that's where most of college football is with Nick Saban, right? Do you think there would be really hardcore arguments from people saying, oh, that's ridiculous, Nick Saban can't be number one?
And to reference number 2, obviously Nick Saban has not won back-to-back titles since 2012. Right. And I think that's the only time he's done it is 2011 and 2012. And Kirby Smart has back-to-back. So, I think that a lot of people will make that case. I think that at this point, it's still premature for what Nick Saban's done over a great number of years. And to be clear, nobody is, Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. I don't even think there's a discussion at this point. I don't even think there's a discussion with Bear Bryant or Newt Rockne or anybody. I think Nick Saban's the greatest. I think if Alabama has another, by their standards, underwhelming season next year, maybe we can have a conversation about the here and now. But I think it's still too early, even though Kirby Smart has 2 titles.
All right, we're in agreement on that then. Nick Saban is number one, and he was number one on the CBS Sports list, which is going to lead us to number 2 and is going to lead us to a conversation that I actually, for real, don't think is going to be all that fun. I feel like we have to have it, and we will have it next on the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, Doug and Shehan are back with our rankings of the 10 best coaches in college football. Who's number 2 for you?
Yeah, it's Kirby Smart. 2-time national champion, won the last 2 national championships. I think that what he is doing right now is downright scary for college football. Obviously, they land the commitment of the number 1 player in 2024, Dylan Raiola at quarterback. So I don't think that this is stopping anytime soon. I think that when you look at the programs right now that are functioning higher than anybody else in college football, I think Georgia probably is number 1 right now. Now that's a snapshot of this moment, of course, but I think that Georgia right now is the it program in college football, and Kirby Smart is the reason why.
So having covered the Ohio State-Georgia semifinal, I just getting sort of the first time I was really around Kirby Smart up close and personal. I thought ingenuity, I thought culture, I thought motivation, structure. I just thought, man, this guy has a lot of stuff in place. They're talking about doing yoga. They're talking about like the way they start off practices and how they try to do this and the coaches they have assigned to this. And it was just like, man, this guy has really thought this out. And as I think about, so I do think there's a big 8, but I think 6 of the 8 have a ding. And I have Kirby Smart 7th, and this is the only reason why. And I think we have to talk about it. A player died this offseason. And I think that's not Kirby Smart's fault, of course. But I have questions about the off-field culture at Georgia right now. There seems to be, to me, to be a street racing culture at Georgia that at least previously did exist that led to the death of a current player in a car being driven by a drunk staff member of the football program. And of all the things in my 20 years covering college football that we have all gotten wound up about, all the little NCAA violations, all oh, this guy said this, or did this guy not penalize a player enough? A player died in the car of a member of the program while racing the best player on the team. There's another great player on the team who was stopped for street racing. There were other instances that the cops have talked about. And I still feel like it has not been enough of a discussion in college football. And it feels like to me there have been things along the way in college football that were minuscule compared to this, that were much bigger deals. Now, and we have, unfortunately, have had other deaths associated with college football programs. We had a player at Maryland die during a workout. DJ Durkin, very rightfully so, lost his job for that. We had a staff member killed at Notre Dame because he was up in a tower in a storm at a practice and it fell over and he was killed. I don't know that that's anybody's fault, but when you're the head coach, you're sort of in charge of everything. But this is a cultural issue to me, Shehan, and I don't think it is unfair to include that in a ranking like this. And it's not fun. It's May. Hey, let's talk about college football. Whoop-de-doo-doo-doo. It's almost time for games. But this is real life, and this is culture. This is leadership. This is responsibility. This is all those things. And I feel like it has sort of slipped past everyone. I don't know why. I really don't know why. Because it feels like it was a Jalen Carter issue because Jalen Carter was the player who was involved in the racing in the other car when this player died, and this staff member who was drunk and was driving died. And it became like a Jalen Carter draft position issue. And it feels like to me it has not been a Kirby Smart Georgia football culture issue. And I think it is. And I certainly am not satisfied with the answers. And Kirby Smart says, oh, it's not. He gave like one interview about it. So if I'm going to ding, right, I have a list of, if it's the big 8 and it's like, hey, these are all good coaches. Well, this is a big thing to me. So I'm going to put them at the bottom of the top tier. And if this didn't happen, this happened after their celebration. If you had asked me to do this list the day after the national championship game, I might have Kirby Smart first. Because for all the things we said about Saban, I don't think anything about what Kirby Smart has done is a fluke. I think he understands this program top to bottom. I think he thinks about everything, which then to me is like, he's not oblivious to an issue like this, but somehow it kept going on. This guy is in control of everything, Shehan. So I just felt like we needed to do this. And I don't know what I'm not trying to do. It affects my view of Kirby Smart, and I think it should affect people's views of Kirby Smart and the Georgia football program. So if we're talking about, hey, I'm AD X, I'm President X, and I'm looking to hire one of these guys for the next 3 years to get my program over the top, it would affect my hiring decision. Because the other guys who I have ahead of her, Kirby Smart, are also very good football coaches and don't have this. What do you think of this? Is this not, it's not fun, but it's real.
Yeah. No, and I think, actually just last week, another player was arrested on suspicion of DUI. So this is not an issue that he seems to have resolved in the months since then either. And then even, it was a transfer player. It's hard whenever you have a transfer to sort of assign blame, I guess. But, Mississippi State transfer Rara Thomas was arrested on suspicion of domestic violence. Right. So this is not a small number of incidents. And the thing is, we have the actual tragedy, but you look at all the stats about drunk driving and things like that. Usually somebody who has a DUI or has an accident like this, they've driven drunk multiple times. They've street raced multiple times whenever this happens. So this is the incident that obviously caused somebody to lose a life, but it probably wasn't the first time. And so, no, I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation that probably does need to be had. I think you're right. We, like you said, it became a Jalen Carter discussion because it became an NFL discussion, because it became a draft positioning discussion. I think that even, not to draw a comparison because they're different situations, but, I think that it's even like when you look at Alabama with the Brandon Miller situation, so much of it is about, just gets transferred to the guy because it's about the draft and it's about the future and it's about the NBA. And it's like Jalen Carter was one piece of many pieces in that discussion. And, I think that certainly he deserves a level of accountability for it, which I think that, to some extent he's had. But you're right. I mean, it was a University of Georgia staffer, somebody who works for Kirby Smart, driving drunk and killing a student. That does feel like it has been a little glossed over. With by the way, a car that was rented by the university. That's the other part of it too. So, I think I think it's a very valid point. I think for me, it's something that more I'm keeping a very close eye on, maybe, than something that I'm defining right now. But I think, again, the fact that they had somebody arrested for a DUI last week, I mean, come on, guys. Come on. If there's one thing in college football right now that shouldn't happen, it's a player at the University of Georgia driving drunk, of all things. And so, no, I think it's a good point. I think it's something to keep an eye on. I mean, for goodness sake, Kirby, like, you live in Athens, Georgia, like, you can create a fleet of Ubers to get these guys from place to place if you want to. I've seen your recruiting budget. You've got the money for it. So I do think that this is going to be something to keep a close eye on. And you know what? I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that Kirby Smart and the University of Georgia and this program have been held accountable enough for what happened in a lot of ways.
So I'm not saying anybody who has Kirby Smart 1 or 2, whatever, is wrong. I factored it in. So let's move on to who I have number 2, who maybe is not part of the Big Seven. And I have Kyle Whittingham of Utah 2.
Number 2? Wow.
And this is why. Everybody else, I have a ding. Everybody below him. I don't know what the ding on Kyle Whittingham is right now. Utah has made the Pac-12 championship game each of the last 4 seasons that wasn't a COVID year. That wasn't a jacked up COVID year. They've won the last 2. Last year, they beat USC twice when it felt like USC was the best team in the Pac-12. The year before, they beat Oregon twice when it felt like Oregon was the best team in the Pac-12. He has it rolling. He's been doing it for 2 decades. And I think if you took Kyle Whittingham and dropped him at USC or Georgia or Michigan or Florida State or Ohio State, I think he'd be ready to win national titles. I think this is a top to bottom coach. Leadership, motivation, scheme, culture, structure, everything. And he has made Utah something that really Utah should not be. And I don't know right now. Now, listen, they're at a peak right now that outside the COVID year, the last 3 years, they finished 16, 12, and 10 in the final AP poll. That's really good, but he's also 154 and 74 in his 19 years at Utah. Like, this is real. Even when he's bad, they don't have losing seasons. He's only had 2 losing seasons in 2 decades, basically. So I think he's a guy that people like to put 11th, 8th. Hey, Kyle Whittingham. Don't forget Kyle Whittingham. And at this point, I'm like, well, why isn't he higher than that? Because when we get to all the other guys, I'll say, I like everything about this guy, but. But I don't have a Kyle Butt. I don't. Like, what's the thing that you would ding Kyle Whittingham on that would maybe make you question why? I don't know that he's a national title coach right now. And that to me doesn't mean he's going to win a national title at Utah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Probably not. But if you dropped him at one of the 5 or 8 best programs in the country, why couldn't he win a national title there?
No, it's a really good question. I think for me, I have Kyle Whittingham 8th. So which I think is very giving him a lot of respect too, right? Like, I think that I consider him one of the best coaches in the entire country. I think the question, and part of this comes down to, I guess, how you see the University of Utah, I guess you could say, and what this job is and what I mean, because one thing that I think is a little bit of context for me, not everything, but a little bit of context is, in 2004, Urban Meyer had this program at number 4 in the country at 12-0, right? And so I think that just complicates things for me, because I do maybe think that this is a program that can win at a high level. But all that said, I mean, Kyle Whittingham's done it. He's won 10 games all these times. They've obviously won 10 games 3 times in the last 4 years. Like you mentioned, they've competed for the conference. They've won the last 2 conference championships. I think that, like, and this is not a knock. This is just like when I'm comparing them against literally Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney and Jim Harbaugh, is I think that they've come slightly short of competing at the very highest level. I mean, even last year, right, they kind of backed their way into the Pac-12 title game, which, again, this is Utah. That's incredible. Like, back your way into anything you want, back your way into the Rose Bowl. I do not care. Like, you deserve it. But, like, when I'm comparing him to the extreme highest names on this list, I think that's my question. I think it would help for them, because last year was his highest ranked season since 2008 and since they've entered the Pac-12. They finished number 10, so they have a top 10 AP finish. They didn't have one before that during his tenure there, and like some of that's just like weird math, right? Like they finished number 12 the year before that, so it's not like they were bad by any means. But I think that that's my question. I'd love to see Utah have a top 5 finish under Kyle Whittingham, because I do think he's capable of it. I do think the program is capable of it. But, like, I mean, he's obviously a miracle worker. Again, number 8, I think, is, like, I hope I'm expressing how much I love Kyle Whittingham and how good a job he's done.
I kind of box you out when I have him 2 and you're like, okay, well, I don't know if he's 2. It's like, now I have to criticize Kyle Whittingham. That's what I'm trying to do to you.
Come on now.
I know. I do think it's possible that he's just filling the vacuum in a down Pac-12, which is sort of what Mark D'Antonio did at Michigan State for a little while. That when Michigan was down before Harbaugh got it rolling, and D'Antonio had that stretch of, like, I think it might have been 5 out of 7 years or something where Michigan State won double-digit games, and it was like, is Mark D'Antonio the second best coach in college football? And then probably in hindsight or whatever, it's like, no, but he really had them maxed out for a while there. So,
and they beat USC twice. They beat Lincoln Riley twice. Like, that happened.
They beat early Lincoln Riley. Yeah. And so, but in a world where always said it's like, oh, the Pac-12, they're not good enough to make the playoff. And then Kyle Whittingham's like, well, we'll be the best team in the Pac-12. That's fine. But they're still not a national force. So, like, I anyone who's like, Doug, chill, I get it. So, but I also, I'll list all my dings when I get to the guys down the list a little bit. So who's number 3 for you?
Number 3 for me is Dabo Swinney. Obviously 2 national championships, was the consensus number 2 coach in college football for a great many years. It hasn't been his greatest 2-year run, obviously, at Clemson University. But I think that, again, you go back and look at what this program was when he took it over and where he's taken it, just unbelievable. And the fact, because Clemson is a program, they obviously won 1 title in the 1980s, but this is not a consistently competitive program. Dabo Swinney was only the second coach behind Nick Saban to win multiple titles in the college football playoff era. Now, Kirby Smart has joined him, and that's part of why I have him number 2 now, but Clemson is not one of these programs. It is not Alabama. It's not Georgia. It's not that kind of program. Now, obviously, Georgia also hadn't won a title since the 80s, but I think that we can know the difference. I think that he's built this into something formidable. I think that he's changed Clemson's place, not just year to year, but in the sort of state of college football. And I don't think that there's a reason that Clemson should be what Clemson is, except for the guy leading the program.
Yeah, he's maximum Jonathan Smith. He's maximum Matt Campbell.
Yeah.
Like, what does this look like when you are sort of solely responsible for what your program has done, and then you do it at the highest level? The ding I have on Dabo, who I also have third,
Yes.
we agree on this spot, is they had the consistency at coordinator for so long. I think there were questions about like how much of that was them. Was it Brent Venables and Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott? But I also give him a ton of credit for firing people and making a change and bringing in Garrett Riley. So if he had not done that this offseason, I might have Dabo lower. But that was like, to me, like, hey, I still got my fastball. I'm not afraid to shake it up. I'm not only loyal. Because when you look at what they have been, starting in the 2015 season, this is the Football Outsiders year-end rankings for where they ranked on each side of the ball. Offensively, starting in 2015 up through last season, 13th, 2nd, 15th, 5th, 5th, 6th, 79th, 44th. So as much as I think we think about how important Brent Venables and that defense has been to Clemson's success, they fell off a cliff with DJ Uiagalelei. And like that really, and that's why I still have him third. It might just be they got caught in a weird spot with a quarterback who wasn't going to be Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. It kind of threw him off for 2 years. So 77th and 44th the last 2 years compared to what they were offensively, it's terrible. Defensively, since 2015, Football Outsiders final rankings: 8th, 6th, 2nd, 3rd, 6th, 3rd, 17th. So even like, so last year without Brent Venables, now they're no longer top 5. They're still 17th. They still had a lot of good defensive players, Miles Murphy and Brian Brzee and everybody you saw get drafted this year. So they've got to replace that talent. Now you're not recruiting to Brent Venables. You got to see what's up there. But really, it was an offensive fall off. And if Cade Klubnik in year 2 and Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator, I think when Dabo's that aggressive about it, and it's like, well, how are you going to fix your offense? He's like, well, I hired the best coordinator on the market, and I'm playing the guy who was the number 1 quarterback in his class, who's a second-year college football guy. It's like, oh,
okay.
Well, that seems like a pretty good solution. Like, good luck with that. Now, if it doesn't work, he's going to slide down this list. But for now, with what he's done and the willingness he's shown to keep his foot on the gas to fix stuff, I think third is exactly where he still deserves to be.
Yeah. And by the way, with that, I mean, you said the best coordinator on the market. Like, Garrett Riley wasn't even on the market, man. Like, he just won the dang Broyles Award as the best coordinator in college football. Like, look at Clemson going out and getting Garrett Riley to lead their offense. And Alabama had to settle for Tommy Rees, right? Like, that's crazy.
That's true.
That's crazy stuff. No, I think that all that you said is right. I think the other part of this too is, he gets a lot of credit for, well, he gets a lot of, I guess, slighting for kind of being like, well, his coordinators did everything. They were just always there. They never left. But like, why didn't they leave? Like, he's a big part of that. Right. He did a great job of building a strong staff culture, of building a strong team culture. I mean, Brent Venables had plenty of opportunities over the years, had some major Power 5 offers, and ultimately didn't leave until one of the blue bloods of college football left. Or opened up and had an opportunity for him. He did not leave for just anything. Tony Elliott, it was more of a timing thing than maybe it was a job opportunity, but he left for a Power 5 job. Jeff Scott left to go back to the state of Florida where he's from. Like, guys want to be a part of that staff and want to be a part of that staff for a long time. Now, I do think that Garrett Riley is probably in a cycle or two going to be a head coach. And, so maybe Dabo's going to have to deal with a little bit more turnover at that position. But it is a testament to Dabo Swinney, not a knock, that he consistently has great staffs and that people want to coach for him.
4 and 5, I went back and forth multiple times trying to figure out. I landed on Jim Harbaugh 4. Who do you have 4?
I probably have the other guy that you were debating with there, and that's Lincoln Riley 4, and then Jim Harbaugh 5.
Okay, I have Harbaugh 4 and Lincoln Riley 5. And I think
you're
they
probably
are similar.
Right. I'll say. I think that you're probably right.
I mean, neither of them have gotten all the way there. They don't have national titles in college football, but they really have established an identity. They have a way to win. I do think my Harbaugh ding is these NFL dalliances that I don't think are great. for Michigan football. It's not the end of the world. I thought the one last summer had a chance to really throw him off when basically he wanted the Vikings job and didn't get it. And it did throw him off. They were maybe even better. Probably with less talent, they had a better season. So credit to that, but it's just slightly uncomfortable when it should be rolling. Now, they're also recruiting really well right now, so that's maybe a small ding. For Riley, the ding is defense and what may be too much loyalty to Alex Grinch. If Lincoln Riley had been if he had made a Dabo Swinney move this offseason, like fired Alex Grinch and just got the best defensive coordinator he could find that wasn't even available, I might move him up. But I have questions about that side of the ball, and I think it's held him back. So that's why I went, because I think what Harbaugh has done with his staff has been extraordinary the past 2 years. And they both have a style of play. You both know, I think you know what you're getting when you go play at Michigan and USC, and it works. It has not worked for a trophy yet. But man, it works. That's why they're not number one. But it's almost a coin flip to me for Harbaugh and Riley, and we just happened to land one was heads and one was tails for us.
I mean, come on, it's not fair though. Jim Harbaugh has a whole development staff working for the Baltimore Ravens just to provide assistance for him, and vice versa. No, but I think that
But Lincoln Riley has his brother telling him how to run offense.
I don't know. I think that their offense is just no, this is a conversation for a different day, but they run very different offenses. But so I think that one of the things with Lincoln Riley is we know what he can do as an X and O's football coach. I mean, I think that you maybe say that he's the best X and O's coach in America, probably. Now, I think it's the maybe sort of program stuff that we have some slight questions about, but like, if you want any questions about his X and O's ability, he left Oklahoma, which went 10-2 during his final season, and then they went 6-7 without him. Then he left for a program that went 4-8 the previous season and won 10 games, 11 games. Like, he is a guaranteed 10 wins. No matter where he is, no matter what he's doing, no matter what roster he has, he is like the surest 10-win bet in college football right now. And the fact that he was able to pick up and leave, we've had this conversation before, right? There are obviously those 4 teams when we first started this podcast that had made up 20 of the 28 spots in the college football playoff. I think that we are seeing now that it was not the University of Oklahoma, it was Lincoln Riley who had those teams in the college football playoff. And I think the fact that he was able to pick up so quickly, and if Caleb Williams doesn't get hurt, then they're in the playoff, right? Like, they're in the playoff. And it took a wild 2-point conversion in the regular season game where they might have been in the playoff anyway. They would have potentially have been undefeated heading into the conference title game. So I do think that year 2 is going to be critical for him. If they don't make the playoff this year, which this is like absurd standards, but that's the game. If they don't make the playoff this year, then I think he drops. I think that this is a year that they have to make the playoff. But for what he was able to do in year 1, the fact that he was able to build a roster on the fly like that, I mean, it's impressive, man. It is impressive to leave one job for another and see the first job tank and the second job soar. That is crazy stuff.
I think it's nice to have an identity that is strong as Jim Harbaugh and Lincoln Riley have it. When Michigan hired Jim Harbaugh, when USC hired Lincoln Riley, they knew exactly what they were getting, and then it's happened. They've gotten that, and they've won with it. So I think those guys both deserve to be in our top 5. We'll take another break here on the College Football Survivor Show, and then we'll come back and Shehan will make people mad. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, back for our final 4 for each of us on this College Football Survivor Show. Shehan, we were talking about where's the line? We've gone through your top 5. Your top 5 is Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, Lincoln Riley, Jim Harbaugh. You have Kyle Whittingham 8th. We were talking about where we draw the line here for a tier. Feels like we're getting to your line drawing. Who do you have 6th?
Yeah, I think that the top 5 is probably what I would consider a tier. I mean, honestly, I'd probably maybe the answer is actually that I'd have a top 3 tier and then maybe a half tier underneath that with the next guys. But number 6, I have Brian Kelly. I think that, look, he has limitations as a coach. I think that they're well known, but a big one of them is recruiting. he was not a great recruiter at Notre Dame. I think that even in just the time that he's left and Marcus Freeman has taken over, we've seen that Notre Dame is capable of more than what he was capable of. But he decided to go to a program that recruits itself. And look at the results. In his first year, they win the SEC West. They win against Alabama in Baton Rouge for the first time, I think it was since 2010, I think was the stat. And with the roster, that's fine. They're not what they're going to be under Brian Kelly. They've continued to recruit at a really high level because, again, this program just recruits itself. But I am glad that Brian Kelly was kind of able to have this moment because he's done such a good job at Notre Dame for the past couple of years. This has been what he is. He's been a top 10 coach for a while at this point, but the opportunity to go to LSU, to beat Nick Saban in his first season, to get that monkey off his back of the whole, he can't beat the very top ranked teams. Well, he can if he has a top ranked roster. I think was huge for him. And, he's like probably the line, I'd say, of like the hyper elite group, but I think he certainly is a no-brainer at number 6 in this conversation.
So I have him 10.
Okay.
And I had like a multiple people. It's like, who should be 10th here? And then when I really thought about it, and I had Jonathan Smith on that list, I had James Franklin, I had a couple other people that I was trying to think about. I was like, no, it's Brian Kelly. So the one thing is, as you said, it felt like he really took Notre Dame to a new place, but also it feels like they've gone to another new level potentially now that he left, which is like, okay, well,
it hasn't happened on the field yet. I will say though, it hasn't happened on the field yet.
Which is true. Like we're assuming it's going to, but if Marcus Freeman brings in better recruiting classes and goes 8 and 4, then they'll be like, oh, Brian Kelly, we missed that guy. And I do think that the roster building at LSU has been really good, right? That he's worked the transfer portal. And as you said, LSU kind of recruits itself. And it feels like LSU's in for a really big season. And again, he won at every level from the jump, right? He worked his way up and really
Grand Valley State legend, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like this is a guy with a long resume who's trying to sort of cap it off with the national title at LSU because he didn't think he could win one at Notre Dame, but he elevated Notre Dame. So we do have to give him credit for that. But I have another guy 6th that we may as well have the conversation. I have Ryan Day 6th. And I am curious.
And I have him 10th.
Why should Brian Kelly be ahead of Ryan Day?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So just to talk on Ryan Day, right? I think that a big part of this conversation depends on how you view Ohio State. And I view Ohio State as potentially the single best job in college football. I think that when you talk about their infrastructure, I think when you talk about their investment, I think when you talk about, generally speaking, their pathway, I don't think that there's a program year over year that has it better than Ohio State. I think that they have built something that has lasted across multiple coaches. I think that they've built something, and I'm not just talking the last 3 as well. Obviously the last 2 coaches won national championships, but I'm talking about for the last 40, 50 years. They've been an elite program. They've never been bad. And so I don't think having good regular season results is that compelling to me because everybody has good regular season results at Ohio State because it's such a good program. Now, obviously, I think that especially in those first couple of years there, he had elite regular season results, like all-time regular season results. But I do have questions about the fact that in the past couple of years, the Urban Meyer players have kind of graduated out of the program and the team has gotten notably less good and not won the Big Ten. And part of that is Michigan coming up, of course. But, I mean, again, that's the bar for me at Ohio State, is being in the Big Ten title game, is winning the Big Ten. Obviously, they made the playoff this past year because they were able to back in because USC lost. But I don't know. I mean, it's really hard for me to place Ryan Day because I don't know necessarily that I'm confident that what he does is transferable. I know that he can do this thing at Ohio State at this program that also kind of recruits itself. But if you were to take Ryan Day and the conversation, and I'm actually very excited that we're going to get to see this up close and personal, the Lincoln Riley versus Ryan Day conversation when they're both part of the same conference. But, when you talk about Lincoln Riley, right? he takes a program to multiple playoffs, then leaves, and immediately has a new program at 10 wins. If Ryan Day were to leave for Penn State, if Ryan Day were to leave for insert X program, I mean, it's definitely possible that he's able to just do that he can just like machine this way forward. But I just have more questions about it. I have more questions about how much is he protected by the Ohio State infrastructure versus how much is he elevating it.
So how many playoff games has Lincoln Riley won?
0.
Right. So Ryan Day's won more playoff games than Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley had a torpedo the program where a national championship contender with the Heisman favorite and the season explodes and he leaves situation, which, I get it, but also like it's not great. Ohio State has made the playoff 3 out of 4 years under Ryan Day. The previous 4 years, they made the playoff once under Urban Meyer in 15, 16, 17, and 18. So it's also like it's not a national championship standard at Ohio State, right? They went 3 decades between the last one they won in 68 and they kind of claim one in 70 and what they won in 02, right? But Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer both won national titles very early in their tenures at Ohio State, which just gives you a bunch of capital to work with. Ryan Day hasn't done that. I've been doing a lot of research for a separate pod that I'll do for the Ohio State pod I host called Buckeye Talk, where we've been researching Ohio State, like history and big games compared to other programs. Ryan Day against top 5 opponents is 2-5, which is sort of like, it's like, well, what are you doing? Well, they lost to Clemson in a semifinal in 19. Then they beat Clemson in a semifinal in 20, and then went and lost to a Bama super team in the national title game. So that's 1-2. Then I have it all written down. And now then they lose in 21 in the regular season to Michigan, right? So that's 1-3. Then they beat a top 5 Notre Dame team to open the 22 season. That's 2-3. Then they lose to Michigan and lose to Georgia to end last year. So that's 2-5. Then the 5 losses are all playoff teams: Clemson, Bama, Georgia, and 2 to Michigan. So Ryan Day's ding, he's lost his last 2 to his rival. And it's like, you can't do that. So like, I couldn't have him any higher than this. And I do have him behind Lincoln Riley. But it is so similar to Lincoln Riley that they both inherited something from coaches that were winning. And then I think they both did, at least Ryan Day's like sort of elevated Ohio State from what it was at the end, kind of, right? Now they, Urban in 14, but like the last 4 years under Urban Meyer, they kind of couldn't get out of their own way with losing to Purdue and losing to Iowa. And at least Ryan Day's losing to good teams. So I don't think it's like a super crazy fight over how dare you have him 10, how dare you have him 6. Like, I think we're both in the same range. I have him at the bottom of this, near the bottom of this tier. And so I asked about Lincoln Riley. The Brian Kelly thing, I don't know what Brian Kelly's ever done. If you say, well, Ohio State's an easier place to win than Notre Dame, and Brian Kelly maximized Notre Dame more than Ryan Day's maximized Ohio State, I guess there's an argument there. But also 3 playoffs in 4 years is pretty good anywhere. And then when you get there, well, who are you losing to? I mean, if they make the field goal against Georgia to end the game and win the national championship, where's Ryan Day on this list? Now, ifs and buts. So, of course, it's like, well, you can't not count that. You didn't lose. You lost. So, okay. But they competed. They were right there with the best team in college football. So I'll be curious. Like, the other people you're going to have ahead of him at 10 is like, would you, for real? Like, if you were starting a program, like, you really would take your 9th guy and your 7th guy ahead of Ryan Day, like with his offensive acumen, and I think he has established a culture. So, it's not a huge deal. We're not that far apart because I don't think you can't have him in the top 5 right now. I don't think you can have him in the top 5, even though he's made the Final Four 3 out of 4 years as the head coach.
I mean, I think that what it, I guess, sort of comes down to for me is that the 9 guys that I have ahead of Ryan Day, and people will disagree, and frankly, good. And I'd love for Ryan Day to prove me wrong. Go win the national title this year. I thought that they were going to do it last year. I thought that they were the best team in the country last year. But I think for me, when I look at the top 9 guys on my list, I see 9 guys who have all built something from relative scratch, who have all built things on their own. And again, you can be the head coach at Ohio State and still win your way up, right? Like it's not like you are destined to just be undervalued because you're at Ohio State. But they have done things that weren't supported. Like, for example, I think that like Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day, I always used to have closer because Lincoln Riley did take over the Bob Stoops machine at Oklahoma. But, I actually think that what he did this first year at USC is really validating of what I always felt about his ability to be transferable. And maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case for Ryan Day. But, I get it. Like the standard in Ohio State maybe shouldn't be to win national championships. But when I've seen the rosters that they've had, it doesn't feel like they've done the thing that I feel like they maybe should have done. And this is all perception. This is all perspective, right? Like, but that's where we're at.
It's also hard because when you evaluate all these coaches, like the roster that they have, well, Ryan Day shaped this new Ohio State roster. They didn't have quarterbacks like this before Ryan Day. So he brought in Justin Fields. He recruited CJ Stroud. He's going to be responsible for Kyle McCord and Devin Brown if they're good. So you do get some credit for that. I mean, again, I understand giving Lincoln Riley credit for USC. I do think you have to ding him for driving Oklahoma off a cliff in this last year. Spencer Rattler implodes. He has to go to Caleb Williams. They lose to like the only two decent teams they play in the regular season. And everybody's like, oh, you're going to LSU? He's like, no, I'm not going to LSU. Shh, how dare you? And then he goes to USC. So like, let's ask the people in Oklahoma. How you want Lincoln Riley to build your program? He torched Oklahoma on the way out.
I think that it might have, I think that maybe they feel a little bit bad too about the fact that Caleb Williams is no longer their quarterback and Dylan Gabriel is. But the other part of this too, though, is that we just sat here and said, okay, well, maybe Dabo Swinney's program just whiffed on a quarterback and maybe it's a speed bump. I mean, look at the guys other than Spencer Rattler who have come through there, right? Like Spencer Rattler clearly did not work out. He clearly did not work out. But 17, Baker Mayfield won the Heisman. 18, Kyler Murray won the Heisman. 19, Jalen Hurts finished second in Heisman voting. And then now Caleb Williams, who won the Heisman. So like that looks like more of a speed bump than obviously, what we have elsewhere, right? I mean, he's been a coach for 6 years and 4 quarterbacks have won the Heisman Trophy. That's pretty crazy stuff. Or 3 have won and one finished runner-up, sorry.
And and Ryan Day hasn't had a speed bump as the head coach yet, because he's had Justin Fields, CJ Stroud, right? So his speed bump might be now. Who knows? We don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be. But again, it's the right, as you said, I'm Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day in the same conference. Let's go. I think there's going to be a point, like once we get to 2024, but this isn't going to be hypothetical anymore. They're going to play, and they might play multiple times a year. So I think people are where they are on this. And it's really the Jim Harbaugh argument about Ryan Day. It's the third base argument. It's like, okay, well, 3 playoffs in 4 years, but look at what you inherited, man. Come on. Couldn't a lot of coaches have done that when you inherit the Urban Meyer machine? So it just depends on your interpretation of that. All right. You have Kyle Whittingham 8, which means you have number 7 left. I have Kirby Smart 7th. Who do you have 7th?
I have Luke Fickell 7th. And he was a difficult one to place because, look, this was a list whenever we did this for CBS. He was being a Power 5 coach for the first time ever. And so I did have him at number 7, though. Obviously, he took Cincinnati. He's the only coach ever, and likely will be the only coach ever, to take a group of 5 team to a 4-team college football playoff. He had an incredible run over 2 years. They lost to Alabama, but like at no point did they look like they didn't belong on the field by any means. Like Alabama had some explosive plays and won the game. It just happens. I think that you look at what he accomplished at Cincinnati. This is not just succeeding at a high level. This is succeeding at an unprecedented level, what he was able to do over there. Now he obviously goes to Wisconsin, and it's going to be a good test for him. Again, he is somebody who I guess you could say to a certain extent is going to be like on ranking probation, where we're going to have to see what he does early on. Not that they have to win big at Wisconsin in his first year, but it's going to be a new challenge for him. But I mean, you can't ignore what he did for so many years at Cincinnati, taking it to a place where this program has never been. And I think that he has enough of a track record at this point that he was able to be number 7 on my list.
So I had Luke 9. It's always like,
Sure.
is this a little bit too high? And it's like, you have him 7. CBS Sports has him 9. I think Luke is great. I agree with everything you just said. I am not 1,000% sure that Luke would be the right guy at one of the 5 or 7 best programs in the country. I don't know that Luke at Bama or Luke at Georgia or Luke at USC or Luke at Ohio State would be the best, would be the optimum thing. He might be, which I think you could say about Kyle Whittingham, right? I mean, there's certain guys who are at a certain level, and you say, well, they feel so good there. D'Antonio in his heyday at Michigan State, Chris Peterson, they feel so good at where they are. If you took them to the highest profile place, would they be able to handle the pressure in the spotlight, or are they perfect right in that next tier? And I wonder that about Luke. I think Wisconsin's a great fit. Super impressed by the Phil Longo hire, that he's going to try something new there. He is a defensive mind. I think he built culture. I think he builds all those things. I think it belongs in the top 10. It's one of those things, again, Ryan Day or Luke Fickell. You can hire one of the two. You're going to hire Luke Fickell? I'm like, okay, I don't know about that, but not much disagreement between us with Luke Fickell at 7 for you and Luke Fickell at 9 for me. Then the last guy for me is my number 8 spot. You have your number 9 spot, and I assume we have the same guy. Who do you have?
I'm curious if we have the same guy. I have Chris Kleiman from Kansas State.
Oh, no. Okay, now I'm curious about this. I had Sonny Dykes because he gets me the national title game, and I got to give a nod. I don't think this is a Gene Chizik. This isn't that TCU run was not fueled by a single super player where Cam Newton would have dragged 50 different coaches to a national championship that year. That is a rare dude. There's a lot of Sonny Dykes. Scheme, motivation, leadership, gumption, culture, structure in that TCU season, and the best season in TCU history. So, where was Sonny on your list?
Yeah, he's number 11. He's right there. Frankly, the only difference, I guess you could say, between Kleiman and Dykes for me is one, I think that when you look at specifically what they did last year, I think TCU is an easier place to win than Kansas State. And the other thing too is that Chris Kleiman has more seasons and more of a track record at the Power 5 level right now than Sonny Dykes does. Sonny Dykes obviously failed at Cal. Sonny Dykes is a really interesting conversation because I think that he was perennially undervalued because of his time at Cal. And let's take a step back now. I think that Cal might just be maybe one of the worst jobs in college football. Maybe it just sucks. Maybe it's impossible to win there, and the administration doesn't even care about whether you win there. Because put that aside, which he did win 8 games, by the way, in 2015. He did have some good success there. But went to Louisiana Tech, turned them into a program that they hadn't been consistently, went to SMU, won their most games since 1983, and then went to TCU and won 13 games for the first time in program history. So this is not a fluke, right? This is a track record of success, of elevating programs, of getting them to the highest level. And I think that he deserves that credit for that. Again, the only hesitation was that, obviously, first of all, Chris Kleiman beat TCU in that Big 12 title game. I think that certainly helps his case. But he's been the head coach over there for 4 seasons. 2 of them were 8-5 seasons, so really, really solid seasons. The pandemic year was a little bit of a down year, and now I think we can kind of erase that because of what they did last year. And he's taken them back to national relevance. He had them in the Sugar Bowl. He had them as a top 15 team in the country. And I think that he deserves to be talked about in that group. Now, if Sonny Dykes, especially after losing this sort of generation of TCU players, does transition out and is still able to make a Big 12 title game, push for close to 10 wins, then I think that he pushes his way into the top 10 potentially. But right now, just because of the longer track record, I have Kleiman at 9 and Dykes at 11.
Kleiman won 3 national championships at a lower level. I always think, right, the place you were you the best? It's no, he was the best. Do you think he'll ever move up? Do you think that Chris Kleiman, before he retires, will be the head coach at Oklahoma or Florida or Penn State or something like that? Or do you think it's going to be more like a Bill Snyder? All right, I'm going to stay here for the rest of my career and for 20 years show people how good I can be at Kansas State.
So he signed a contract extension through 2030, which I think is significant. Obviously, look, anybody can get out of these extensions if they have the right program buying. So I think that if I had to bet, I'd bet on him staying. The big thing that I think you have to say is Chris Kleiman runs a really smart, tough developmental program. And is he going to recruit at that elite level? I don't necessarily know. The one thing I'd maybe keep an eye on is if one of the premier Big Ten jobs opens, right? Like, I'd be curious if Iowa came calling, right? Because I don't know off the top of my head if Kleiman has any connection to Iowa, but this is a place where you can
He's
recruit.
from Iowa. He grew up in Iowa.
Yeah, so this is a top 20 to 25 recruiting program that I think that you can still do your thing, and you can still, sometimes to a painful extent, have control over your own program. But I think that maybe that's the only sort of job that Chris Kleiman would consider. I don't think that necessarily he's going to end up at an elite blue blood or, one of those types of programs. Especially, I think, one thing, and I feel like I reference my conversations with Dave Aranda a lot, but that's because he's like the most insightful person I've ever met. Dave Aranda talked about coaching in the Big Ten versus the SEC versus the Big 12. And, with the SEC is a talent acquisition league. It is a fill holes with recruits league. The Big Ten is a little bit more of a developmental league. The Big 12 is kind of a mix of the two. And you could tell that Dave Aranda hated being in the SEC for that reason. That's why I didn't really think he was a contender for the LSU job or any of those ilk. I think that Chris Kleiman definitely airs more towards that Big Ten identity or that Big 12 identity than he does the SEC identity. So if Penn State, I don't know if it's too out of his wheelhouse, but, if Penn State were to open, I don't know, something like that is possible. But I think that if I had to bet, I think he stays at Kansas State.
Yeah, he might be the leading contender to take over for Kirk Ferentz. Grew up in Iowa, played at Northern Iowa.
That's right.
Coached at Northern Iowa. Then after the fact, really might be the guy for that. Speaking of Kirk Ferentz, again, people know, whatever the deal. I do think Kirk Ferentz is driving Iowa into the ground for personal reasons. It remains remarkable what he's done at Iowa. There was a list that PFF put out the other day of most players on NFL rosters. I think Iowa was 8th.
Yeah.
The development at Iowa, and the defense is so good. If they had a functional offense, and that he's done it for this long is remarkable. But here at the end, he's choosing his kid over the program, and you can't tolerate it. But that's a huge ding. It's like, what's your ding? It's the ding is coming from inside the house. The ding is at the Thanksgiving dinner table. But really, at times, people can make an argument that Kirk Ferentz is a top 10 coach. Jonathan Smith, I thought about. James Franklin, if we think Penn State's about to elevate, when I was doing that, hey, big game thing, I think James Franklin is 0-6 against top 5 teams. It's not quite there, right? That at the highest, he's still a tier down from that, but he's been pretty darn good for a long time. And then you can see people like what Mike Norvell is doing at Florida State. Florida State, by the way, just got Keon Coleman as a transfer from Michigan State. I thought the Florida State receivers were bonkers in the spring game. And it's they added maybe the best receiver in the transfer market. What he's doing, rebuilding Florida State, took a little time, super interesting. You watch what Dan Lanning might be at Oregon that has a chance to really hit. We know we both like Kalen DeBoer at Washington. There are some good, interesting younger coaches on the rise here, but also we basically had the same guys. I had Chris Kleiman on my mind. I don't think I'd had him of 11th. I might have had Chris Kleiman 16th or 14th or something on
totally
my list.
Fair. Yeah.
But there's a pretty decent consensus here, Shehan, with how people view this. And you think Saban, Smart, and Dabo for most people at the top because they have rings. And then that next tier of people that gets you maybe to 6 or 7. And then you're at the sort of overachievers at programs like Kansas State and TCU and Wisconsin and that kind of thing. But there's not a lot of controversy, I don't think. Let's see what Deion Sanders does in year 1 or 2 at Colorado, because a lot of, he's making waves. I think it has a chance to hit. You can't, you can't, how would you even rank Deion right now? He has some success at Jackson State.
Wasn't easy.
Sure,
it wasn't
but you
easy.
Can't, how do you even go about it? Where did you have him? I don't even know, what would you take into account?
Yeah, whenever I was trying to deal with some of these coaches down the list, right? Because there's a bunch of new coaches. I did credit, first of all, what he's done off the field, the staff that he's hired, things like that. I gave the coaches who haven't coached a game yet credit for that. And I also gave him credit for his for what he accomplished at the lower level as well, because, he turned Jackson State into a winner. And so I had him 54th, which is, pretty high for a coach who hasn't coached yet. He is somebody who, again, it's going to go one way or the other, and I'm very curious to figure out which it is. I probably think that this first year is going to be a little bit of a disaster because I think they're just going to be figuring everything out. But I think he has a really good staff. You mentioned coaches with rings. So I did calculate to figure out which coaches on the CBS list that I had like the most divergence from, I guess. You'll never believe who is my most divergent coach on the list, the coach that I had ranked much lower. That would be Jimbo Fisher.
Oh, see, you are who you are. Were you also divergent on Sark a little bit too?
I had him 7th. I had him 8 different spots, same tier. I had him a little bit lower in the tier probably than other people did, but I had him at 45. He ended up at 37. I think we're about the same. But so my top 3 most overrated coaches on the CBS list versus mine. Jimbo Fisher at 1. I had him 37. The CBS list had him 20. Hugh Freeze, I had him 42nd. The list had him 26th, which, I mean, come on, guys. 26th? And then this one really got me, actually. We had Lane Kiffin at 14, and I had him at 28th. What? Yeah, 14.
Yeah, that seems high.
Come on. That is crazy.
And if you had him at 28, that means some people must have had Lane Kiffin in the top 10.
Oh, yeah. Y'all... I get it. Lane Kiffin's great. I think that he does some things really, really well. I think he's a great offensive mind. But come on, guys. What are we doing here? What is going on? He actually, the funny thing was, I think he moved up 5 spots after last year, which is weird because he won 2 fewer games last year than he won the year before that. He was a good coach at Florida Atlantic. He was an inconsistent coach at USC. He was an inconsistent coach at Tennessee. People are reading too much into this, transformation of Lane Kiffin into being something than he's ever been. He is what he is, man. And it's pretty good. Again, top 28 is a really good ranking. There's a lot of good coaches in college football, but 14 was insane to me.
So referencing some of these names, I grabbed some other people off the list from the top 100 coaches from September 2010 as done by Shehan's friend from the chess club. 62, Dabo Swinney. 62nd best coach, 2010. 54, Jimbo Fisher. 48, Lane Kiffin at USC. 40, Tommy Tuberville. Hey, how'd it work out for that guy? At Texas Tech at that time. 37, Steve Sarkisian at Washington.
Wait, if Tuberville's at 40, where's Joe Manchin? Where's Mitch McConnell?
He's in the top 15. Yeah, he's in the top 15. Steve Sarkisian, 37 at Washington. Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, 26. Kyle Whittingham, 24 at Utah. The guy's been a top 25 coach for a decade and a half. Number 19, Randy Edsall at Connecticut. What are we doing? Number 18, Greg Schiano at Rutgers, which actually at that time probably made sense. Number 14, Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. Number 9, Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. So, some familiar names, and sometimes you're just putting Randy Edsall in the top 20.
That's interesting, actually, that they ranked Brian Kelly that high that early, because this was before his run to the national title game. And he had success at Cincinnati. He had success before this, but, credit to them. I mean, they were on the right side of history when it came to Brian Kelly. Some of the coaches that I had on the other side who I felt like were underrated. Oregon State, like I mentioned, I had Jonathan Smith 12. They had him 32. I had Matt Campbell 16. They had him 35. And then Kalen DeBoer, I had 17. They had him 31. I also, somebody who I really kind of had a little bit of a hard time with, but I ended up going in that direction, was Matt Rule. Matt Rule, obviously, his time at Temple and Baylor was pretty incredible. And I don't think that you can count the NFL stuff. It's completely irrelevant to me what happens at the NFL level. So I ultimately ended up slotting him at 15. We ended up putting him at 27, which I think is probably closer to right. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting with, again, some of these first year coaches, even ones who have coached before, to try to evaluate what they're going to do at new programs.
No, I mean, and it's the Saban model is a pretty good one to follow. It's like, oh, he won at LSU, but I don't know. The Dolphins thing was kind of okay. And it's like, oh, no, he's still a good college coach. All right, so the top 10, Shehan, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, Lincoln Riley, Jim Harbaugh, Brian Kelly, Luke Fickell, Kyle Whittingham, Chris Kleiman, and Ryan Day. Me, Nick Saban, Kyle Whittingham, Dabo Swinney, Jim Harbaugh, Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, Sonny Dykes, Luke Fickell, and Brian Kelly. Not that much disagreement, but we still had a nice conversation about it. We have some more good stuff planned. We appreciate you guys joining us twice a week. We've been going twice a week with the free show for a couple months now. We used to have one behind a subscription wall. I see the numbers. The numbers are ticking up a little bit. So if you're a new listener, thanks so much for trying us out. We try to put everybody in context, everybody in perspective. You know your team, but we're looking at everybody with a shot at the playoffs and trying to say, hey, where does this team measure up against this team? And we try to do that twice a week, maybe not 52 weeks a year, but like 49. We don't take that many breaks. So I appreciate you guys, whether you've been listening for a long time or whether you're just joining us. For now, for Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.